You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I am Interchange.
I am Interchange.
I am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I am Interchange.
Indigenous activist Terry Bradley has his hands and heart in a lot of pots. Whether he's advocating for the LGBTQ community, igniting a passion for the democratic process with Forward Montana, or pinpointing colonizers' role in the desecration of the other and their responsibilities going forward. Bradley has a lot to say, and it's not all met with an accepting acquiescence. While he challenges whether we can make America great again, he argues that we have the capacity to achieve that greatness for the very first time, and that it's worth the fight. I'm Tate Chamberlin, and in this podcast, Terry Bradley and I discuss identity, colonization, the challenge of tribal reconciliation, and hope on the horizon. What almost kept you from being here?
Just being tired.
Tired?
So tired. Yeah, my essential state is tired, so...
Your essential state is tired.
Yeah, I don't say no to anything. That's my serious problem. And like the things that completely exhaust me are the things that reinvigorate me as well. So it's like a vicious cycle of like wanting to invest more time and then just being even more tired.
If you could have any animal size to fit in the palm of your hand, what would you choose?
In the palm of my hand?
Yeah.
Oh crap, I don't know. I'm just gonna go with my favorite animal.
Yeah.
It's the mimic octopus.
A mimic octopus.
Yeah. They're relatively small anyway.
So it might fit in my hand anyway.
Yeah, but I don't think they're that small.
What kind of toys did you have growing up?
Not a lot. We grew up on the res, so there's a lot of sticks and rocks, and we were lucky enough. My family had a house like in the brushes, like surrounded by miles and miles of woods, and so we just played in that and made like makeshift forts and caves and went like fishing in the creek and stuff. Yeah, we didn't really have toys. Toys? What are those? Yeah, no, we didn't have much for toys. Like occasionally, yeah, but
It sounds like the great outdoors offered that. And did you have siblings?
yeah, I have 4 sisters and 1 brother.
Are you all around the same age?
I mean, yeah, we're all within the decade. Yeah.
Within the decade?
Yeah, I would say so.
Tell me about your family. What reservation?
Fort Belknap Indian Reservation, north central Montana, up on the High Line by like Malta, Zortman, near Havre.
And what tribe?
I'm enrolled in the Grovant or the Aaninan nation, but
Grovant or the Aaninan?
Yeah, Aaninan.
Ninen.
Yeah.
Aaninan.
Yeah, you got it.
And your family lives on Fort Belknap?
A majority of my family still does. My immediate family, most of them now live in Havre right now. Just more job opportunities, better education.
Tell me about your parents.
Oh gosh, my mother was incarcerated at the age of 9. My dad didn't want to raise 6 kids by himself, so we all got split up. I moved down to Huntley to live with my auntie. Some of us went to my grandma's, some went to other aunts, but I went with my auntie.
Were you the only one
Mm-hmm.
that went with her?
Yeah, my auntie and I are pretty inseparable.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, very young age.
So she kind of, when you were 9, she took over kind of as your parental unit.
Yeah.
Does she have kids?
Yeah, God, now she has so many. But at the time, it was just my cousin and I, Victoria, and then they had 2 more kids, and she married into a new marriage and had an older daughter. He did, so yeah, another big family.
Yeah. Where was your tribe from initially, and how did you wind up at Fort Belknap?
I'll be real honest, I have no idea. And that's kind of the experience of a lot of people, is they don't really know. A lot of the origin and a lot of tribal knowledge is kind of gone. And there's, of course, in any group or people, there's hearsay and legends and, skewed knowledge. But I really don't know. And I think that's mostly for me has been an outcome of me trying to survive once I got off the reservation and moved in with my auntie, was relinquishing my identity as being Indigenous or being A'aninen, because I don't know anything anymore. I remember in kindergarten, like learning how to say, and it's funny to think about this, but learning how to say the Pledge of Allegiance in traditional language, both in Gros-Ventre and Assiniboine and in English. And now I like couldn't even begin to tell you what that is.
So the Gros-Ventre or the A'aninen, you are part of their tribe, and because of assimilation and kind of the displacement of all the cultures and deletion of the cultures, you kind of lost touch with your heritage and don't know where you're from or the culture that it kind of celebrated.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there are people who have that knowledge back home and on the reservation. I just don't know them. I mean, I grew up with parents who were drug dealers and alcoholics. They weren't with traditional ceremony and culture. They were very much numbing themselves to the reality that was on the reservation in the first place. So how could they, reach out and do that? So there's no way I had a chance to do that. And recently, I think I'm doing that. Like a few years ago, I started growing my hair back out because that was a huge disconnect for me, was consistently cutting my hair every 5 weeks.
Because white culture told you to do it?
Yep, because I wanted to be as white as possible, and hair for me was a huge thing. Because I remember being young and having long hair and then coming off the reservation and getting it buzzed off. And like that history literally repeating itself. And I was like, okay, so this is what I got to do to survive, was learn how to speak and look like and act like white people, pretty much.
And relinquish your culture.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
If you had one word to describe that feeling, what would it be?
Empty, probably the best way. There's no forward or back or start and finish. There's just an ether.
It's kind of where you were brought into the situation.
Yeah, definitely. It's a huge thing that I'm trying to like get back. And now I definitely like have plans to move back and start learning and trying to help instead of just running away and being as far away as I can.
So the life on the reservation is tough, and there are a lot of systemic issues with it, including like being a food desert and the lack of people participating in the traditional culture. And so you've kind of gone away and became a white person, and then maybe with that distance learn to kind of love it and want to be drawn to it again and participate.
Definitely. It's not like I'm completely detached from my culture. I go home I try to go home back to Fort Belknap at least twice a year. And one of those times is the annual Hayes Powwow, which was canceled for the first time in my life this year.
Because of COVID.
And I felt the same word that day, like that weekend. It's the second weekend of August every year, and I automatically go home. I can feel it in my bones. And then not to be there, it just felt empty.
Yeah, it's kind of a pit in your stomach, especially after it seems like you're trying to retune into it.
Definitely.
COVID just kind of was like, not yet. Are you able to fully participate in your culture by being somewhere else?
Ooh, I think if you were raised in a traditional family and then moved off the reservation, yes. Because you have that historical and lifetime knowledge of ceremony and rules and traditions and how you go, like food or how you interact with certain people in your family. Like there are rules set in place that people know and that are just instinctual to them. and then they move off the reservation and still uphold those things. I didn't have that. So I learned white culture the way I currently am speaking right now. I would go home to Fort Belknap and people will say, "Why do you talk like a white person?" Or "Why do you think you're better than us?" So I have to code talk and I switch to my res accent, you know.
There's a res accent versus like a Bozeman accent that you bring.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated. But have you seen Smoke Signals?
Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about that, but like, "Hey, Victor, how you doing?" Like
Oh, okay.
those kinds of things. And, "Hey, can I borrow $5? I'll pay you back later. Hurry up." Stuff like that. I wouldn't say that normally. I would say, "Hey, may I have $5? I left $5 in my car. Like, I'll pay you back later."
Yeah.
Like very different like intentions, and it changes with who I'm speaking with. Like in a group of other fellow urban Indians who live off the reservation, I would probably still pick up the accent. All of a sudden, we're talking a completely different language. Like I remember I was part of the Society of Indigenous Educators at MSU, and we would go to conferences, and over a week together, like doing every waking hour together, coming back, our accent thick as hell. And then I get in the car with like one of my white friends who picked me up from the airport, and they're like, "I cannot understand the things you're saying." I'm like, "Oh shit, okay." And then I have to think through and be like, okay. It's
Okay,
a literal,
I'm
yeah.
back.
Yeah, a literal
Like-
mind shift in how you interact, and like, because your mannerism changes, your demeanor changes, like everything about you changes. And it's not necessarily like the faking of an identity, but it's a shift in recognizing like the difference in culture and like existence. And you have to literally live in two different worlds in order to coincide what it means to be, you know, successful and with being Indigenous or being successful within white culture. And so it's like a lot of work, but I also like wouldn't have it any other way.
What's more important to you, your success on the reservation or success in white culture?
For me right now is my success within white culture is because I think the dominant culture and it being white and colonialistic has proven to me that no one was going to go up to bat for me. No one was going to stick their neck out for me. No one was going to give me handouts. None of that. And so that meant when it came time to graduating high school, I had to apply to 3 times as many more scholarships than everyone else in my class, which I did. Which meant,
to be able to afford school, college.
Yep. And it meant having 3 times as many more jobs while I worked through college, which I did in order to be successful. Like I now like know my worth as a person, not just Indigenous, not just queer, not just, you know, a first generation graduate. I know what I bring to the table now. And now I can use that knowledge to share and provide avenues for other people to be just as successful, if not more successful, than I will be in my lifetime. And I think, at least right now, is why I think it's more important for my success.
So you can go back and help lift.
Yeah, I think there's a huge distinction between white people existing in white culture and non-white people existing in white culture. I think white people who go through college and do jobs and write articles have something to prove, while non-white people who go through college and get jobs and write articles and write books have something to share. And there's a difference between that is like being white. God, it must be so hard to have to prove everything all the time. When you're non-white, you share that knowledge. You turn what is essentially a weapon into a tool, and you are the means of reproducing that tool, giving it to someone else, having them learn how to use that tool so they can share and it repeats.
So white
and
culture
ripples.
doesn't take on that sharing attitude.
No, it's very individualistic.
And non-white people share more because out of necessity, but also because they're just good people.
Yeah, I think so.
Is it that simple?
Well, I
I think it's that simple for sure.
yeah, I do think so. It's like if you look at any aspect of like getting good grades or getting a good resume, good recommendations, like people who have to talk about you specifically is very individualistic. And we are a society who's like, oh, but did you see his ACT scores? What's your zodiac sign? Those kinds of things.
Do you know your sign?
Yeah, I'm a Scorpio.
You're a Scorpio.
Well, obviously.
I'm an Aries.
Yeah.
I don't know the difference. Like you say obviously, and I'm just.
But I think the difference is like me as an Indigenous person introducing myself with who my nation is. It's like, oh no, I'm not just here for me. I'm here for everyone who is not here. I'm still a representation. I'm still a member. I am still part of a whole. When the difference is a lot of white people who buy into white culture, and I definitely did for a long time. I didn't even tell people I was Indigenous for a long time. A lot of people thought I was either Chinese or Mexican. And
It was kind of a closet experience for you?
Oh, for sure.
You hid it?
I didn't necessarily hide it. I just didn't
Share. Yeah.
or didn't celebrate it. And that was definitely a consequence of like trying to survive in it. And now I think of everything that I do, everything that I work towards is not just for me, but it's for we, like everyone. Anything that's very different from a lot of people who go into business or get a small loan of $1 million, those kinds of things.
To pursue capitalism.
Yeah.
So you got a lot of scholarships and worked 3 jobs to go to school in Bozeman. What did you major in?
Elementary education with a science option.
Elementary education and a science option.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't do that now, do you?
No, not at all.
What do you do now?
Oh, I do a lot of it. There's a lot you can learn in education.
Actually, I think that you describe going back to the reservation and teaching what you've learned. So maybe that was like a stepping stone for what you'll do eventually.
Definitely.
Maybe.
And even like technical things like how to develop a lesson plan has taught me how to plan events and appeal campaigns for my current position, which is development manager for a nonprofit, a thing that I never saw myself doing in 1,000 years.
What nonprofit?
Forward Montana.
Okay.
And now, like, I plan effective campaigns and I know how to manage donors and write really good grants. And those are definitely skills I learned from being a teacher. Was I had to learn how to differentiate and how to write for my audience, and then know how to design something backwards from goal to process. Yeah, I use those skills all the time, just not in the traditional sense of a classroom in front of a bunch of kids.
Right. It could be a classroom of policymakers or teachers or students or whatever. So Forward Montana, what kind of projects are you working on right now?
Oh, we're still getting out the vote for the election that's coming up. Then we're going to take a break. And me personally, we're doing Rockstar Rush, which is a grassroots campaign where we talk to monthly donors, potential or past rock stars, and try and get them back up as monthly donors so that we can keep our work flexible and kind of do what we need to as young people trying to get out the vote and get people empowered and engaged in democracy.
Are there more people engaged than there were in 2016?
Yeah, there's record turnout of voter registration and voters across the country, and we're no different. Like, I have family and friends who have never even looked at a ballot who have already voted because they just got their ballot today.
Yeah. So keep America great or make America great again.
What about it?
Which one?
Neither.
Neither. I mean, if it were current tense to get out of the current situation, it would be to make America great again.
Well, both imply that it was at one point great, either now or in the past.
Yeah, right.
I would argue it was never great. An entire country built on genocide and slavery can only be so great. And the fact that we're only just now celebrating suffrage for women after 100 years is ridiculous. And like Indigenous people, people of color are barely getting their rights as it is. Tell me, when exactly was it great? Is it great today? Because I don't feel that.
It's probably great for white people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that sentiment says exactly what we already know, is that it was built to be great for white people and is still maintained by whiteness to be great for white people.
What about everyone
What
else?
about it?
This topic this week and you're participating in is kind of this tribalism versus globalism. What do each of those mean to you?
Tribalism, for me at least, means cohesion and exchange. Globalism, for me, from my understanding and my experience, is the ever expansion of your own intention, your own culture, the domination rather than, it goes back to that whole like trying to prove something versus share something. But yeah, I just think there's a huge difference between the intention and then the impact of what tribalism is and what globalism is in the fact of how they've been executed throughout history.
Tribalism has more cohesion than globalism because it's more tight-knit and kind of looking out for their own. It's easier to maintain that familial structure.
And it's not even cohesion or like same thought. It's ultimately it comes down to like respect. Tribes were interacting and still being their own tribes, being intertribal knowledge and governments, and establishing that there's still a you and a me and also a we, is like that respect of you can exist and you can go about doing it and respecting that existence, while globalization has no respect, no exchange. It wants to infect and expand and go forth. I think that the idea of like manifest destiny was globalism executed.
Manifest destiny would be because like Christianity is entitled to this land to take over and use.
Mm-hmm.
And globalism kind of repeats that by inviting more diversity and branching out even further into the world.
Definitely. Well, and I think there's this weird disconnect that thinking tribalism is only small or isolated. Like it can still be a global phenomenon. We can still respect and exist and, exchange without having to dominate or, provide genocide. It's been proven throughout history. I mean, there's I think there were only 10 countries that weren't colonized throughout history.
Only 10?
Yeah, who have been impacted by colonialism. Someone of a white descendancy came in, took control, and either killed or enslaved those people.
Maybe a less sensitive person might say that that is the story of the world.
It's the story of globalism.
Story of globalism.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's only one way. That's only one story.
Well, that's the white way.
Yeah.
There were millions of tribes here before good old Columbus lost and found his way here that were still separate, but recognized that they were stewards of the land. They had their own ceremonies and traditions and governments, and they still made it work and they were flourishing. And we want to talk about that's just history. It's no. There were murderers and rapists who came over here, deranged people who were sent away from their countries in order to find the new world, is a romanticization, and I think is very dangerous narrative to kind of push or maintain.
Maintaining that new world settler instead of colonizer.
Yeah.
Like Little House on the Prairie.
Oh, definitely.
Made it just sweet and innocent and just kind of painting indigenous culture as that evil to white culture.
Oh, for sure. I think it's very prominent, especially in Montana, is look at Virginia City. It is a ridiculous spectacle. and romanticization of settlers.
The Wild West.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
It's ridiculous. If you want to see the real consequence and kind of reality of settlers and colonialism, you can go to a reservation. And they want to paint that as us failing ourselves is when they intentionally put us on land that was not farmable. They intentionally didn't provide us care or aid. They intentionally did not uphold the treaties and give us the money that they still owe us so that we could build an economy and a world and a culture for ourselves in whiteness. They still won't give us that.
I've heard that the Black Hills, the Lakota, won't accept the money.
Interesting.
Is that not true?
I
And it's
don't
just
know.
appreciate for the Black Hills. Then white people basically discovered gold in the Black Hills and just decided to start settling on it, even though they had agreed with the treaties
Oh,
that
yeah.
it was the Lakota. Didn't white culture offer them an amount of money that they never accepted? That's still like gaining interest.
I don't know. I mean, all of our money should be gaining interest at this point. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the thing.
Would you take the money?
Oh, for sure. Because at this point, it's billions and trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
Like it's not like a small lump of money. It's not some treaty check where I get every 8 years and it's going to be $17. Like, I would be set for life.
I mean, if you're enrolled member of some tribes, they are issued money each month. Is
Yeah.
that not enough?
No, there are some nations out there who are doing just fine and more than fine. And some of them do go towards like selling their natural forest on their own reservation. And they think that's the solution to what problems they face on the reservation. And I can't blame them for that. I mean, Fort Belknap sold some rights on some mining of a mountain near where I lived, and now it's abandoned. I don't know if we still got full payment for that leasing. And now some of the water and parts of the town are contaminated
Because of the mine.
because of the mining and because they were not set up for people to come in and clean it up and take care of it and restore it. Now, every time I drive up there is a giant part of the mountain missing, and it's ugly and gross. And yeah, now it's just sitting there.
I think the Crow rely on oil.
Mm-hmm.
Oil royalties make up something like 70% of their entire income.
Well, and there's other tribes like over in Minnesota and Connecticut who have huge casinos on their reservations, and because they can go by different rules and laws and regulations, they get away with things that other casinos off the reservation cannot. But they are huge, like buildings the size of cities that you can get lost in for days and never leave. And it's a casino.
Yeah.
And they make millions of dollars
What do you think of that?
taking the white man's money. If he's not going to give it, we might as well.
Is it like a loss to your culture, though?
We went to a conference over in Connecticut and went to a nearby reservation, and they had that giant casino. And the first thing they did was build a museum so that they can keep their culturally significant artifacts and traditional regalia and things that were passed down between generations and generations, so that instead of it going to some England-based museum, it stays there.
Okay, so that's one
Yeah.
instance where it benefited the
Mhm.
community by keeping the stories there. It's interesting how we've got this portrait of a rhino sitting in a field of buffalo, and the artist made the connection to how cultures take artifacts and history of other cultures and just bring them back. And there's just that void
Mhm.
in the original culture that created it,
Yeah.
or that it was,
Oh, for
that just kind of got plucked and placed in this. I mean, museums, they're probably pretty controversial.
Yeah. They're.
Yeah.
I feel very weird in museums, especially when they have real traditional artifacts from non-white
How did they get
culture. Yeah, stole it.
that? Yeah.
Obviously, there are essentially holy things in there that uphold the most significance. It would be like taking the cross that Jesus died in and like putting it up above your mantle. Like, that's weird. And it's sacrificial. Like, you don't do that. And so why are you doing that with our culture and the things that we hold to such high regard? And they just display it. And then they have these little fun facts right next to it. It's weird. It's like walking through a cemetery is like, this isn't for you to be looking at.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this topic for a while, the tribalism versus globalism. And what stuck out to me on inviting you on the topic is I read some of your posts, and you're a very eloquent writer.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you addressed, I think, not all, but I think maybe most white people as colonizers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you hold grudges?
No, I mostly just like calling white people colonizers because it makes them uncomfortable.
Because I like props.
Yeah.
But it's like still uncomfortable. Like it's still not healed.
Yeah, I don't think it could ever be healed if we're going to stay in this colonialistic state.
When you do that, is it just like sometimes to drive conversation and to get people to consider things, it takes like a rude, like provocative bitch slap?
Yeah, I think it serves as a reminder of like bringing it back to context of like, we are in America and you as a white person are a colonizer. Like we need to recognize that all of this land we're currently on, like you don't own this land, I don't own this land.
Mm-hmm.
A separate party of people came over and said, this land needs an owner. And then they thought we were the owners and gave us that title. And then they said, hey, can we lease this land from you, as in pay you while we occupy this land?
But you didn't have the construct of ownership
No.
on the land.
No.
It was kind of that concept was forced upon you.
Definitely.
In one of the treaties, colonizers asked tribes to draw their boundaries before they, like as part of the treaty.
Yep.
It was the first time they had drawn their own boundaries.
Yeah. And that's why there's so much controversy of who, air quote, owned the land. Like here in Bozeman, like it's traditionally known as the Valley of Flowers, and the Cheyenne say they occupied this land, and so does Salish Kootenai way up northeast Montana. And
So intertribal conflict happened. It wasn't all
for sure.
coexisting. Would a tribe, had they been left to flourish without interference of colonialism, would the tribes have gone the same route? Would another tribe have dominated?
No, I don't think primarily, because a lot of our traditional knowledge showcases that we worked between tribes and together. And of course, naturally, like any group of people, there was disconnect and there was disagreement and there were wars. I'm not going to say like we lived in this beautiful haven of agreement and that we were all just like taking care of the world. No, we were people. We still had disagreements. We still had different approaches to solve different problems, especially like belief systems. But the thing was, we didn't set those aside. We recognized and respect those differences, and a majority of the time just found a solution or worked on what we needed to work on. But this whole aspect of like either romanticizing white history or romanticizing what it was like before colonialism is a ridiculous notion to like even ponder, because of course there were people who murdered each other, and certain tribes and certain clans had specific ways on how they found justice. And sometimes it was, let's say, divorce happened. In some tribes, all of the belongings were given to the wife. And she was the owner of everything, and he had to go and restart. And sometimes in like cases of murder, you would either be murdered or you would be castrated or you would be sent away. You could no longer be a part of that group. I'm not saying like my tribe or any other tribe was like this perfect institution, you know, like that's ridiculous. I can barely stand myself half the time. I can't imagine other people in a tribe constantly like interacting and being completely developed in there is, yeah, I think that's a silly notion to think about, is it would have been perfect. Naturally, I think some tribes would die out or merge into other ones, and that's how like different clans and tribes became nations. Clans kept and interacted with a chief. And then they built into more chiefs. And then all of a sudden, hey, we have the Confederacy of the Iroquois, which were 13 different nations of Iroquois tribes. And they all worked together and they coincided. And even some of our current democratic processes are modeled after, tribal things like the Iroquois Confederacy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
What does the United States mean to you?
Potential. I think we're still very much a baby in the sense of history and humanity. We got a lot to figure out, a lot to change, and I think we're slowly getting there. I think we have the potential to do a lot better, and we have the means to do better as well. I want it to be what I know it can be, and then what I know it should be is not this.
If you're going to be along for the ride of the United States, then you see it for its faults and see that it has potential.
And there are definitely times that I want to just say, like, burn it all down to the ground. And that's kind of where I am most of the time. And I think the notion of only wanting to burn it down is very irresponsible and kind of lacks, like, hope for the next generation and the next set of people who will inevitably still have to deal with these things. Is like, how can I make it a little bit easier and be a step or take down a roadblock?
Yeah, that's great wisdom to bring, seeing that, if you did burn it down, it's not going to do any good for someone who comes after you.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Or if I do burn it down, I better get started on, making a new house or building a new road. But I see burning it down as the last resort. And I don't think we're near that yet. My life has proven that you can have innovation and resilience and patience, and you'll get there, because the system isn't set up for non-white people, like, period. And I say period because it wasn't set up for us to succeed. It wasn't set up for us to fail. It was designed without us in mind at all.
Because you're in the flora and the fauna,
Yeah.
managed by the Secretary of the Interior.
And so when we recognize that, you can work within the system, you can find avenues that work and don't work, mark those on a map, and then share that map so that other people don't get lost and other people know where to go
And then they
who
can
to
go
talk
further.
to. Yeah.
Is getting your ancestors' land back the only way to reconcile with colonizers?
I think it's a part of it. I don't think it's the end all be all. I think no matter what, there's so much that was lost already that the emptiness we feel that we think getting the land back would fill we'll still have that feeling.
So if you got it back, it would still be empty because the culture and the community that once was and flourished
Yeah, definitely.
won't come back,
Yeah.
at least for who knows how long.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's the same idea as if I went back and learned my language and then only spoke my language for the rest of my life, I would still know English to my dying day. Like, I am so much part of it and so impacted by it that my mind voice, I know, would always speak in English, even though I would be speaking in my traditional language. There's no amount of language I could learn from my people to fulfill the emptiness or sense of betrayal I have in knowing English as well as I do. And like you said, like, I write a lot and I write very intensely, and that's kind of my only way I know how to not only express myself, but to, like, start healing. And so I know that this is forever going to be a part of me. And I think that's the same way. It's like we'd still have the impacts. We'd still have that little speck of colonialism tagged on, even if we didn't express it or use it within our lives, interacting with other people.
Depending who you ask, Indigenous Peoples Day or Columbus Day, which one do you volley for?
I mean, of course, Indigenous Peoples Day, but my thing is, I just don't like all these holidays. Like, who cares?
So it's just too many holidays.
Yeah. And I think I'm more bitter about the fact, like, yesterday was National Coming Out Day, which was like, okay, now only people can see me as someone who came out, someone who is queer. And then today is Indigenous Peoples Day. So now people can only see me as being Indigenous.
You talked earlier about white people wanting to prove themselves.
Yeah.
Is that kind of going back to
Yeah,
it?
exactly. And I'm like, or I can be all of them. Why can't I just recognize that all the time?
So is Indigenous culture falling for that by requesting to have Indigenous Peoples Day?
I think of it as instant gratification.
Okay, so if you can take over Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, it would be instant gratification.
Yeah, I think it's, for some people, very healing and is definitely like a next step in them claiming their Indigenous identity, or National Coming Out Day, their queer identity.
So there's some good to acknowledgement with those holidays?
Definitely. And I think that's good, great for you. My thing is, like, why do I have to put myself into this day, or my culture, or my being, or my existence into this one day, and then you can only see this part of it?
Right.
And that's in a lot of different ways. Like, you can see at like the MSU or the commission meeting that'll happen is like, we'll take these special days so that you can have your space and your time and your place to be that. And then tomorrow we're just going to ignore the fact that over 30% of Native students don't graduate MSU. But we want to celebrate you for this one day and then use you as a selling,
Let me get your photo for a pamphlet.
Exactly. And they only want to see us in our traditional regalia. You never want to take pictures of us when we're setting up for the powwow or in the classroom, or when we go to our advisors and complain about racist professor. You never want to highlight those aspects of my existence or my experience at college. So why are you doing it this one day for this set amount of time? I get the sentiment, I get the intent of wanting to turn Columbus Day into Indigenous Peoples Day because it's a reclaiming of history. And I don't like how people go about celebrating that reclamation is through only this one flat recognition. People don't dress in traditional regalia every day. We don't look like that, and that's why people think we look like that, is because we only are highlighted, we are only recognized when we're in our traditional regalia, when we sing honor songs.
Is there a support in wanting to capture a media that celebrates that? Could there be a good intention found if white people did choose those items and chose the beauty that they saw in your culture to highlight in media that they created around it to make it remembered traditionally?
Yeah. Yes. And when that's the only means of representation, it turns from helpful to harmful.
So that, and take a picture of all of the scraggly volunteers setting up also. Yeah.
And institute progressive and inclusive policies so that students can be successful, so that you can have more Indigenous people out there, so you can have more representation, so that you can have more people be successful, so that you can have more people share knowledge. Like, the rippling effect is, it just goes back to that whole idea of like proving versus sharing. MSU wants to prove that they have diversity, that they prove that they have Indigenous students. They don't want to share that they have Indigenous students.
So MSU wants to prove it. They made the Native American Center for like the photo ops?
Yes, that center has been in the works for nearly 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the college, the university, refused to find the funding to make it happen.
Would you rather not see it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes. And I've said this from the very beginning.
Why?
I think it will turn into an on-campus reservation because that's where they are going to send all the Indigenous people. That's where they're going to send the investors to show us off. They're going to prove that they're doing all these great things.
Yeah.
And then they're going to continue to let Indigenous students fail and be discriminated against and not feel welcome.
I wouldn't say fail, but maybe I see international students come and they just flock together.
Mm-hmm.
And by creating this center, is it going to create the only place Indigenous people will hang out, keeping them from all the rest of campus?
Yeah, I also think they're going in the same instance of a an actual reservation is they are going to make promises of resources and funding and all of these different things and then not provide them. That's exactly what they've been doing without a center. I mean, there is an American Indigenous center at the basement of Wilson Hall, and that's where all 500 or plus students, whatever the number is now, but back when I was a student, it was a little over 500, almost 600, and that's where we flocked. That's where I didn't have money to print out my papers, and so they provided, not from the university, but from separate funding, provided free printing for Indigenous students. And it's not some perk. They're not giving us free things. They're taking that money from Indigenous students and then reinvesting it and saying, hey, we're providing you with free printing. Are you kidding me? No. There's a reason that I'm over $40,000 in debt. I didn't go to school for free, and I didn't do it in 4 years. They say all these things and they want to prove something that doesn't actually exist.
Should reservations exist?
I don't think they should exist in the current system, even if I think the United States gave us or paid us out, there would still be reservations. There's a joke about having your passport when you go off the reservation because it's a completely different country. Like you're going into foreign country, and the distinction between those cultures is so great. It would take centuries to break those boundaries.
So reservations, yes, but under different circumstances.
Yeah.
What would you do with the land if you did get it back?
I don't know. Build a pool.
You'd build a pool.
Yes, and I think it would instill a sense of purpose again. Indigenous people were literally stewards of the land, whether it was an agricultural nation who stayed in one place, like there was an agriculture before, white culture, and knew how to work the world and the seasons and stayed in one place. But there were also hunters and gatherers who, followed the bison or followed the elk, and they would go through and make sure that they weren't eating too much or they weren't taking more than they needed. They didn't waste anything. I mean, the idea of recycling is like mind-boggling to me because it is so
because it's actually a thing.
It's so rooted in whiteness and or you could just, not use plastic. Like that idea is wild to me. And I've been a part of processing an elk or a deer and literally seeing how every single piece is used. And by the end of it, there's not a single part that is thrown away. And even the example of forest management, we knew when and how to burn fires effectively because we knew regrowth would happen. And now look at how federally managed fires in California. Thousands and thousands of miles are burned up because no one was managing them.
Yeah.
You can look at all the different tribes as a lot of the tribes who were and occupied forested land were migratory because the food that they ate was also migratory. Like they knew not to stay in one place and they had systems, and even how they moved clothing and lodging was also just as mobile. And they built those kinds of things from the animals that they hunted and ate.
Could a population of 7.8 billion survive like that?
Sure.
Really?
Why not?
I don't know. I just look at New York and it's like a feedlot. They basically import all of their food because they don't have enough room to grow anything, creating that demand and necessity to be taken care of.
I think we're picturing two different 7.8 billion people. But I'm thinking
so if New York
more
didn't
spread out.
Yeah, if New York didn't exist, then those X million people living there would be elsewhere.
Yeah.
With
and
some
some people would settle down and stay in one place in areas that, were effective farmland. And other people would move around. I don't think it's that wild of a concept.
Does that future world involve colonizers? If you did get your land back, where would colonizers go?
Back where you came from.
Back where you came from. Do you know where you came from?
Here.
You came from here.
Yeah. I mean here as in Fort Belknap.
Okay.
And that's where I would start.
You would start at Fort Belknap. What about for someone who was born here, who's white,
What do you mean?
like me? I was born in Colorado and I went to school in Montana.
Where did your family come from, though?
Europe. Go back to Europe, man.
Go back to Europe.
Forward Montana is pretty heavy on diversity and inclusion. Should we be concerned about diversity in our population?
I think it is our mere attempt to decolonize systems, and that's it. I think diversity and inclusion is necessary in the current system we have. And I think it's our attempt towards equity while resisting wanting equity. I've been a part of a lot of diversity and inclusion efforts, like at MSU. I'm currently a board member on ACLU of Montana, and now an employee at Forward Montana, all of which have included me on diversity and inclusion efforts, trainings, the whole shebang, going through all of their policies, going through and making a diversity and inclusion statement, those kinds of things. I think it's a good step.
But then you're saying to colonizers to go back where you came from.
Yeah. And
Is that inclusive?
when were colonizers not included? Ever.
I don't know. It's complicated, isn't it?
So when would you go? So going back to where you came from is non-inclusive?
Yeah, I mean, the ACLU is all about bringing in refugees from Venezuela and Central America. But you're here telling me to go back.
Well, they're not colonizers.
You could say that original settlers fled persecution from religion.
Who?
Like the original people who fled,
Christopher Columbus?
just the Pilgrims.
The Pilgrims? The 13 colonies? Is that who you're talking to
Shot
about?
him, spout him, learn all about him.
I think if you're going to look at that point in time, sure, they would be refugees or seeking sanctuary. And we offered that. Indigenous people offered sanctuary to the original settlers, to Columbus, and to turn around and use gunpowder and disease and religion to kill, murder, and rape not only the people but also the land are two very different points in time. And so if we want to go back and say the settlers were the ones who needed to be included, sure. And then once they turned into mass murderers and, those kinds of things, maybe they shouldn't be included anymore.
That was a deal breaker.
Yeah. And I think the difference even now is the power dynamic of white people and non-white people, is that the notion to go back where you came from, white countries of origin or European countries of origin, where you're going to go back to is great, flourishing. Like, it's still being a system of colonization and is still successful. Where the rest of us are going are where we're trying to run away from, or is the exact land that no longer useful, that is burnt up, that has been abused and pillaged and no longer useful. And now we have to try and reconcile with that. So like this whole idea of like me asking you to go back where you came from is saying that you need to go back and be successful and keep doing what you're doing. Do it over there while we stay here and pick up the pieces and clean it back up and steward what was abused for hundreds of years now.
Yeah.
Is like it's not some, hey, you have to go away from here because it's not yours. It's we still have a responsibility to this land and to the people here who are still here, no matter how many viruses you throw at them, no matter how many times you mass genocide us or hang us, we're still here. And we still hold the notion that we are responsible to what happens to the future of not only our people, but also the land and the water and the world. It's a reclaiming of responsibility that colonialism is denying us to have. And then not only they're denying it, they're making it worse so that when we get that land back, we have more work to be done. And we are more than happy. I'm more than happy to do that work because I've already done that work. I've already done 3 times the amount of work to be where I am, to be just as good so that I can then make the world a better place for people in the future. I know that a lot of the work that I've already done, I will not reap the benefits of, and I'm okay with that. But that means that somewhere down the road, someone who was in my exact situation won't have to work as hard, won't have to feel as much pain. Now I can go forward and do even more. This isn't me saying you need to go away. I'm saying you need to stop doing what you're doing because it is harmful. It is ingrained in every aspect of our society: education, politics, social norms, media. The entire aspect of it all is rooted in colonialism and whiteness, which we used as a weapon here in the United States of America. So I don't know when the hell you think like this greatness is coming from, whether it was here
I
or
just
now.
read it. I read it on a campaign sign somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And so
So we can stay if we're good stewards.
that's also not up to me to make.
So pan out to the world view. If white people did go back to Europe, I mean, Europe took over indigenous cultures centuries before.
Mm-hmm.
So how far do we go back?
I don't know. I think a painful reality is it's up to anyone who is still there of indigenous descent, who are still the stewards of that land.
Yeah.
Like there are millions of tribes who are not recognized today. There's only 570 something federally recognized tribes. There are hundreds more. And then there were hundreds of thousands of more before colonialism, but they are not here to claim
All the
that
little clans that didn't
Yeah.
quite amount to
or who
property owners.
complete ethnocide, complete killings of entire clans and nations.
Mhm.
And they aren't here to claim their stewardship, their responsibility. Some of us still are, and then we're still fighting for that. And so I think it goes back to whoever was colonized and if they're still there. Because a sad fact of genocide and slavery and ethnocide is the end goal is that there's no one from original descent there.
So it can be new and this new made up thing.
Yeah. Well, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We wouldn't be debating tribalism and globalism if there still weren't indigenous tribes and nations here.
Yeah.
The whole intent and the whole purpose of reservations, of boarding schools, was to kill the Indian and save the child. And unfortunately, no matter how hard they've tried, we're still here. I see and I recognize my existence as a disruption to this entire society and this entire country, and that makes people uncomfortable. So
I like that about you.
yeah, so I don't feel that bad saying you're a colonizer, reminding you, because I'm reminded every single minute of every day about my oppression and the fact that my people aren't where I want them to be. So why?
So deal with being uncomfortable for a little bit and acknowledge this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is acknowledgement enough? And can forgiveness be found if it's not acknowledged?
I think acknowledgement is the start of the dialogue. It's the doorknob being unlocked rather than locked. I think a lot of people have doors that
So
are
it's a
locked.
start.
Yeah. And I'm okay with that. And that just means we can have a further conversation. And that's why I like using the word colonizer or settler or
I think you prefer colonizer.
yeah, that's my favorite one. But I've been using occupier as well as a newer one.
Do you like Western culture?
Depends on what aspect of Western culture you
What
mean.
parts of Western culture do you like?
That's a hard question. I don't know. My thing is, I always look at the worst of it. All I can think of is movies that I hate or songs that I dislike. And I'm like, okay, wait, what do I actually like? And definitely part of me is like, I listen to Spotify all day while I work, or I listen to podcasts all day. Like, there are definitely aspects. I love having a car, like the availability to drive around. It's funny because I'm not afraid to like use or potentially own a gun, even though I'm very against the fact that guns were a primary factor in colonialism and how effective it was.
So Spotify, podcasts, guns, your car,
My car, yeah. A boba tea.
boba tea. Yeah.
I mean, I think with anything, whether it's bad or good, there's going to be things that we like and things that we don't like. But I know in my heart, at least, if there was a chance for me to jump back before colonialism and be a part of my nation and be like in the depths of it, no hesitation. There's no hesitation. There's no ounce of doubt in my head that I would exchange this reality for that one.
To go back.
Yeah.
How about, you mentioned being queer earlier. I know that First Nations celebrated their Two-Spirit community. Is that what you would have been if you had gone back?
Well,
And what is the Two-Spirit?
the term Two-Spirit is definitely westernized.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Of course it is.
Yeah. So not all of them, but yes, many Indigenous tribes recognized Two-Spirit or more than two genders. Some of them only recognize two. There are some tribes, I can't think of the name, who go up to double-digit genders. And it's the recognition of gender or sex or sexual orientation goes beyond that. It's how you function, what you bring to the rest of your tribe, what you offer, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, like those kinds of things. The tribes that did recognize Two-Spirit members, a lot of instances, it was a holy title, and you had responsibility for healing and medicine. They were often the medicine people of that tribe, and they also held a lot of voice and weight within governmental activities, deciding where to move from and to, and what crop to harvest, and those kinds of things. It's a very holy thing. I don't necessarily know for my own tribe if it was, one, if we recognized it or not, or two, if it was a holy title to hold, because any title you get is something you earn. And so for me, I know I have some friends who are Indigenous and who do identify as Two-Spirit. I personally don't identify as Two-Spirit because I don't feel that I am connected enough with my culture to claim such a title and to earn that title yet.
Is there a way for you to do that, not being able to know your culture?
I think especially since it's a non-Indigenous word or recognition of queer identity, that a lot of Indigenous people, whether they are traditional or urban Indians, that they claim that title. And I think that's fine. But I don't necessarily think I aspire to that title. I think I definitely want to learn more about it, and if it had a place within my tribe, and then trying to reconcile either if it did or it didn't, and trying to marry and intersect those two identities a little bit more. That's what I aspire to. I came out August 17th, 2011. I remember the exact day. And my entire family has never, ever talked about it since. We've never talked about potential suitors or dates or who I like or who I don't like. Nothing.
Is it because they're uncomfortable? Is it because of Christianity?
It's, yeah, all of it. And I guess I am hesitant about the whole only recognizing one part of me because that's only what everyone does. But when we have a powwow at MSU that I helped organize when I was in college, or if I got an award that recognized me being Indigenous, my family would come and celebrate that Indigenous identity. But they would refuse ever to talk about me planning the first lavender celebration here at MSU and in the state, which was a recognition of LGBTQ graduates and allies. They didn't come for that. And I planned the first one in the state. And then I was the MC for the second one. And then I graduated at the third one. Still didn't come to that one. And so there's this obvious disconnect of you only want to see me for one aspect of who I am. And I am still fighting to be recognized for all of it. I think that's a lot of what progressive, inclusive groups are trying to do, is they recognize the intersectionality of human existence and backgrounds and culture and your political affiliation and your age. And if you have brown eyes or, those kinds of things, it literally influences how you go about and how people treat you and interact with you and think if you have rights or not, or if they think you deserve to die or not, or if they think you deserve the money or not. It's every implication because we weaponized that other while trying to colonize everything.
Would you date a white person?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Would it be a learning experience for both of you?
definitely. Because I'm very much set in my ways and how I think and how I approach things. And I tried to be very open and open-minded, but being the Scorpio that I am, I'm also very intense and I wouldn't say manipulative, but
Passionate.
yeah, influential, convincing,
Okay.
whatever you want to say. I think it would be a lot more of a learning curve for them because even my closest friends, like I have a friend, George, who I FaceTime every single day. I call him a colonizer all the time. I probably call him a colonizer more than I call him by his real name.
Mm-hmm.
But he understands it so much that it's not a joke necessarily, but we laugh at it. And it's like, oh yeah, I get it. I get where you're coming from. And when he says something problematic, when it becomes to like race or ethnicity or something bigoted that isn't PC, I call that out. I'm not afraid to do that. And he's like, oh yeah, okay. And then we move on. So I think it comes with if I have to feel comfortable enough to call you out or even call you colonizer, knowing you still hold the power at the end of the day, at the end of the conversation, at the end of me, air quote, attacking you on Facebook or something like that, you need to be okay and secure enough to understand where that's coming from.
Terry Bradley, thanks for being here. I can't wait for this weekend for the big event.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, this is amazing.
Is tribal reconciliation possible? Bradley asserts that the only way forward is paved in challenges to white colonizers and the foundation on which this country has proclaimed its irreproachable superiority. He would argue for all colonizers to return to their original homelands across the ocean, to make way for Bradley and indigenous populations around the country to become the natural stewards they were always meant to be. Others might argue that what's done is done. The past is in the past, and people conquering people is simply part of the species' history. Others might still say that, while acknowledgement of past crimes against indigenous populations is important, a globalized perspective uniting human family across gender, religion, race, and culture may be the only way the planet, let alone the species, survives the existential crisis it now faces. So, what comes next? Maybe it's a little of both. Maybe we work towards equity instead of inclusion. Mirroring non-colonizers, we begin to share instead of prove. We, like Bradley so aptly conveys, find those avenues that work and don't work. Mark them on a map, and then share that map so others don't get lost. And we do it again and again and again. Maybe, when there's no winner or loser, no dominant and no other, there may simply be a species that has acknowledged its weaknesses, its crimes, its missteps, its fallacies, its forgeries, and written a new treaty, eloquently, and in the many-tongued voice of the every and all. Maybe. A huge thank you to our supporters: Susan Karstensen, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, Last Best Comedy, Hatch, Loken Productions, Ben Johnson Photography, Superfluous Industries, and Blunderbuss. A shout out to our media team: Allison Gregory, Pat Loken, Ben Johnson, Jessica Byerly, Shannon Hughes, Nathaniel Johns, Bryant Stersala, and Dylan Weber. Hey, Tate Chamberlin here. Thanks for listening and supporting I Am Interchange. We build our projects to align with the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.